Okay, this is our first real class lecture video on it's sort of an introduction to ancient Mesopotamia and the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is your first assigned reading for the course. Like I said in my other video, it doesn't really matter to me if you are watching these videos and then reading the material, or reading the material first and then watching the videos. Either way could work. Figure out what works best for you. But please do the assigned readings. This will help you as you write your papers for the course and as you prepare for the midterm and final and all that. Okay, so ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here's our agenda for today. So first, I want to say a little bit more about the class's overall theme, about form and formlessness. So I want to define that word, talk about the history of the word as it came into English. I want to talk about how you might analyze the physical forms around you right now, around us in the world. How we can apply this analysis to an ancient form that's kind of confusing, kind of strange, that is the Mesopotamian temple called a ziggurat. We'll transition from the world of art and architecture towards the literary, thinking about a literary form that we'll become very familiar with this semester called the epic. And we'll think about that in relation to our first reading, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Then, we'll talk about the forms that the epic take, or the forms within that epic. So, like how the writer forms the character of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, or Enkidu, however you want to pronounce that. How sexuality in the tale seems to form these characters as people. The form of politics in the epic as well, specifically what I think we can all agree is a tyrannical political form that Gilgamesh participates in. Then we will eventually introduce assignment 1 during the synchronous class period, but I'll go ahead in this video, I'll go ahead and tell you about the research topics that you can explore more in depth for assignment 1. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so form. I was trained, my PhD is in English. I love the Oxford English Dictionary. It's very fascinating. You have free access to it as students here at NYU, so please use it. I can help you access it if you have questions about that. But thinking about this word form, it's kind of a strange word, so we'll kind of delve deeper here. So if you just look up form, it has various definitions, but I think the ones most important for our class are in this first Roman numeral category 1. Form, most simply, is shape, arrangement of parts. Seems very simple, right? The shape of something, its form, how it's arranged. But then things start to get more complicated when you think about these denotations more specifically. So 1a. The visible aspect of a thing, now usually in narrower sense, shape, configuration, as distinguished from color. So not the color of a thing, but its shape, its configuration. Occasionally, this means the shape of a figure of the body as distinguished from the face. So that's kind of interesting. So form is something that is only visual, but not visual in terms of color, visual in terms of shape. It's sort of interesting that the shape of the body is meant by the word form, not the face. So form might be something that's less specific. Usually your face is the thing that distinguishes you as a person, not necessarily your body, unless you have a particularly interesting form or something. Okay, let's keep going. 2, an image, representation, or likeness of a body. Okay, this interests me, going from 1a to 2. 1a seems to be like, the visible aspect of a thing, something that is inherent to that thing, natural to it, perhaps. And then here, with number 2, we're getting into the realm of representation, of not things that are natural, but things that are artificial. An image is a copy of something. A likeness is a copy. A representation is not the thing itself, but a representative of the thing, its meaning to represent. So this is kind of interesting. Form can be something that is quite natural. the natural form that like your hand takes or something. But form might also be something that implies a createdness, like the fact that something has been formed and not necessarily it always existed, it was always natural. Rather, it was formed by something or someone. It's kind of interesting. Okay, I skipped some of the denotations. They're all interesting, but just for our class's purposes, I skipped to 5a. The particular character, nature, structure, or constitution of a thing. Okay, so this is about character, nature, structure. These are descriptors, the sort of essence of a thing, how it is formed. What character of person is it? Man, woman, child, etc. How it's structured, its nature. These are things that seem to be like inherent to the formed thing. It might make it specific. And then 10, I thought that was interesting too, that a form can also mean the manner, the method, way, the fashion of doing anything, as in the phrase, in like form, in like manner. So this was interesting, like with 5a, it seems to be like a descriptor of something's like essence or, characteristics, things that are inherent to the formed thing that we're talking about. But then with denotation number 10, this seems to be more about things that the formed thing can do. Its manner, like how it acts, its way of being, its fashion of, walking, or fashion of like dressing itself or something like this. So this is kind of interesting. Form can be this, it's a very hard word to kind of describe. It seems quite simple, but actually when you start thinking about it, we're getting into sort of philosophical categories of the nature of the world, the nature of being and doing and identity and these sorts of things. So, okay, interesting. I think things get a little bit complicated, perhaps, or maybe they simplify here if we think about the etymology of the word form. Etymology is a term meaning the sort of history of the formation of a word, like where it comes from in terms of its linguistic past. So where the word form in English comes from. So most explicitly, it's from the Old French, forme, from the Latin. So through French, from the Latin forma, which meant or means primarily shape or configuration. And then the derived senses below that I'll get to were for the most part developed in classical or post-classical Latin. And the word has been adopted and is in familiar use in all the Romance and modern Germanic languages. So it stems from this Latin word forma, but it's present in all of these various evolutions of Latin into different Romance languages and Germanic languages too, which is interesting. So even though we of course are doing this class in English, I find it interesting that this word form it does have a claim to the ancient world. It existed in classical, post-classical Latin. And you can see why. It's a very useful term. Okay, so here are some of the etymological ideas where this word comes from, not only from Latin, but some philologists, those are studiers of language, studiers of words, they think the word comes from the Latin ferere, which is, if you study chemistry, you'll know that is the word, at least in English, for iron. So blacksmiths, they fashion iron. So ferere is a verb meaning to strike. So that's kind of interesting. If we think about forming something as striking it, what sort of images or ideas come to your mind when you think of striking something? It's a little bit more violent than I would think. Like forming, when I think of forming, I think of like, shaping something in clay maybe, or maybe drawing a form, but striking something into form. That's something that strikes me, I guess, as in terms of its meaning. Other philologists compare form in its etymology to the Sanskrit word dharman, which is a neuter term meaning holding, position, order. And it comes from this root dar, or jur, meaning to hold. So this is interesting as well, like quite different from the root, if the root is ferere, to strike. This one is much more Kinder. I think it's much kinder. If you hold something or position something or order it in order to form it, or if you hold something in order to form it. That's quite a different image that comes to mind than striking something into form, right? So anyway, I think, just keeping these things in mind is interesting. And I think we'll see in a lot of the literature we read different ways of forming characters or forming stories. The sort of role of violence or the role of something that's a little bit more gentle in terms of holding here. Okay, so interesting. Did that complicate or simplify? I'm not sure. But anyway, it's potentially interesting. Hope you find it so yourself. Okay, so then thinking about like, why is this an organizing principle for this course? I want to extrapolate from the world of sort of like philosophy and even like material stuff towards like how you might use things, because this class is nothing if not useful to you. That's my main goal. I hope that the course is of use to you. And here's kind of a way to make that connection. Something's form, its physical shape or its characteristics or whatever, can tell you something about the function of that thing. What can it tell you? Well, let's kind of have a thought experiment here. So look around you and wherever you are, whatever room you're in, what is the physical form of that room? Is it a square, rectangle? Usually that's the case, maybe not though. What is the form of the objects inside your room? And remember this, that the form of something usually gives you some sort of indication about how to use that thing. So if you were to think about your house, the room you're in, from like you're a scientist or something, how does the form of your room tell you how to use it? Like, how do you know where to walk in and out of that room? What are the sort of visible signs? How do you know where to sit? There's a way in which objects invite you to use them in a particular way. Perhaps it indicates the shape of a hand. Like scissors, for example, they have those two like loops. This would be easier if we were in person. There's two like loops on the bottom that indicate where you kind of shove fingers. It's designed to fit the average human hand so that you can maneuver it and use the scissors in that way. A chair is organized in a particular way to invite you to sit into it. Your knees buckle at a certain point, so do your ankles. As you sit down, then you're comfortable. Okay. So yeah, as you kind of walk around your house or the world around you, we kind of inherently know how to access the world based on the form of it, but that took some knowledge to get to that point. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. And then in terms of this class, the form of something, its objective form, its shape, its characteristics, it may imply something about the cultural value inherent in that thing. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Let's do an example. The ziggurat. So, you might not have heard of this word before. I never learned of it until I was in college myself. It's a strange word, you hardly see it, but it's this term for this temple of the ancient Mesopotamian, Babylonian region. Here's an example of one that I think that they were able to reconstitute here. The ziggurat of Ur, circa 2100 BC. So this is a ziggurat, and it's a very strange thing. Like, what is it? If anyone knows, this would be the time that I would ask, a class what it is. How does the form of this tell you how to use it? Just so you know, it's quite large. We'll go over dimensions in a second, but here is a kind of a visual cue. I think that person's probably a little tall. But say you were a person coming upon this enormous temple in the desert, standing as this yellow person is at the base of this set of stairs, Note that there's stairs going straight up from where the person is, and then at like 90-degree angles to the left and right of the person, there's more stairs. So like you could be over here to the left as well, walking upstairs. How might you feel if you were that person coming upon the ziggurat? You take some time and think about it. Like, what would be the feelings that you'd feel as you approach it? And then as you start to ascend the staircase. Why, for example, are the staircases that narrow? You know, you could imagine them having like a more rounded set of or more rounded staircase, such that more than one person could ascend together. You know, like you could go up and then like a group potentially. But how they've designed this ziggurat, this person, this yellow person here, really, I think you'd have to be, you know, single file perhaps. Maybe you could walk with your friend or something up there. How does that change how we approach the ziggurat? Okay. Think about a person up here now. So say you've done all the ascending the stairs. It's probably a gazillion stairs. You finally get up there. You're tired. Okay, you're Mr. Orange guy now, and you turn around and you look out around you. How do you think you'd feel then? Okay, interesting, interesting. And then you might think about a little bit more about the shape of this. Why have these ways of ascending only on one side? All the rest of the ziggurat, from all you know, this is the front part of it here with the staircases on the opposing side, and you know, around the other sides. Basically, there's no other way to get into the ziggurat. There's like not a back door. There's no basement. You know. That's kind of interesting too. Like, you know, if you were like an invading army, you know, for example, how could you take the ziggurat? Like, if you wanted to claim this, you know, for your king or whatever, your king or queen, how would you take it? It would be rather difficult. There's only 3 ways to get up to the top, and then by the time the army gets to the top, then everyone's like converging at the central point where the guy in orange is. That would be quite difficult to actually capture this ziggurat. Anyway, all right, we'll talk more. We'll talk more about this quote in a second. This is just sort of like a contemporaneous account of the ziggurat. I'll return to this slide in a second because I think it's important, but maybe in a second. So here's just some more images of the ziggurat. There were various ziggurats all throughout ancient Mesopotamia, organized around these large cities. So here on the left, this is a reconstruction of Uruk. That's the town that Gilgamesh is the king of, with the Eanna ziggurat in 3000 BC. So it's a reconstruction of what that would look like. Eanna is the name of the temple. It was devoted to the god Anu, which is like the I think he's the main he's the main god in ancient Babylonia. This reconstruction is Uruk at its height, which had a population of 40,000 people on 1,000 acres, and at this point it was the largest civilization in the world that they knew of at the time. You can kind of get a feeling of how different scale has become these days, especially. You know, I'm here in Shanghai, which is, you know, I think it's 26 million now. Pretty crazy. So here's another ziggurat here on the right. The ziggurat devoted to Anu, this very important god. I think he's, there's different variations in different Babylonian religious practices, but in terms of the Epic of Gilgamesh that you will read, Anu is the sort of chief god of the universe. So the Anu ziggurat at Uruk began with a massive mound topped by a small temple during the early Uruk period. We don't know a ton about ziggurats apart from the fact that we assume that they are related to the religious practice of the time. So I think, you know, when I was asking you how you would feel as you're ascending the stairway, you know, you'd be looking upward, you'd be looking up all the whole way as you're ascending, getting closer and closer and closer to the top of the ziggurat, which is where the temple to the god is housed. Okay, here's another sort of just a visual. This will give you more of a sense of scale. This is little people. Here, yeah, so this is kind of how you would ascend the ziggurat. I'm sort of pausing a little bit because this is really all we know about the ziggurat. There's no, you might assume that you could get inside of it, you know, like a bit like an ancient pyramid of Egypt, but actually that is not the case. These were constructed of solid clay, so they would just kind of build these like large mounds to achieve a kind of height to get closer to the sky. That's about it. Okay, so I swear I'll turn back to that slide from before, but just like thinking about the form of ancient art and architecture, we can start to think about the form of ancient literature as well. So literature can take forms as well, and the main form that we'll be thinking probably the most about in this class is epic. We'll consider other forms as we get closer or further into the semester, the lyric poetry, for example, and also drama. But epic will be our sort of first major form to think about. The Epic of Gilgamesh. What is epic poetry? Epic poetry is a literary form, so like kind of like a novel is a form, or a comic book, or what's another form? A poem. So epic is a literary form. It's often narrative, so it tells a story, but it's a narrative that's structured with poetry. So we will usually say epic poetry. Not all the epics are poems, however. We will be reading the Ramayana in a verse form, so it reads a little bit more like a novel. But most epic, and in fact the Ramayana was originally in Sanskrit, which had a meter to it. But all the epic poems we'll be reading in this class have meter to them. So by meter we mean sort of a structure of rhyme, sometimes rhyme, but mostly rhythm that has to do with syllables and stress. The stress of those syllables. So if you studied Shakespeare in the past, his meter is iambic pentameter. The various epics we'll read, we'll talk a little bit more about the meter for them each specifically as we get into them. But yeah, epic poetry has a meter. That's because it usually was sung in the past. So it had some sort of rhythm to it because it was performed. It was sung by a singer. Epic poetry is often set in a distant time, so in the past, before the present moment of composition. So that's important. We're looking backward towards usually grander, more glorious past that was better than the present moment. Epic usually involves extraordinary feats of extraordinary men and women who interact with gods and or other superhuman forces. So just like the past was better than our present moments, the people back then were more extraordinary, better, more amazing, more exemplary, all this sort of thing. Usually gods feature. Epic poetry also usually informs the audience of the values of the people or nation that produced the epic. And so that's kind of be our kind of goal in this class, is to kind of think through the ways in which these stories convey values of the culture that produced that epic. Okay, so with that in mind, let's return to that slide I told you about. Yes, so the ziggurat of Ur. We have been sort of talking about how this temple likely was created by the Babylonians, by the Mesopotamians, to inspire awe and sort of a religious feeling in the populace. Like, look at this amazing structure, larger than anything else around it. It positions your viewpoint towards the sky, towards the heavens. As you ascend, you get more filled with this sort of reverence towards the god whose temple is at the top of the ziggurat. That seems to be the intention of the ziggurat in terms of the Babylonians, the people who created this temple. However, just because that's one perspective on the form of something, that doesn't mean it's the only perspective. And so that's going to be one of the great things about this course, is we'll be able to fully inhabit the perspective of the writers of the epic or the other of the poem, and think through like what are their values that they're meaning to instill in the reader or the audience. But we can also be critical of that voice. And that's what this quotation is here. The ancient Hebrews in Genesis, they talk about a ziggurat as well, but they're viewing the ziggurat from the perspective of a minority class in ancient Babylon. So the Hebrews were this, minority people, always in danger of being kind of crushed out. They were often, in fact, it's called the Babylonian exile. They were forced out of Babylon because of their religious beliefs. And in Genesis 11:4, we have this interesting quote. I'll go ahead and read it. And they said to one another, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name." So this quote is interesting. It's from the Bible, but it's quoting the Hebrews' idea of the Babylonians. So the Hebrews' idea of the Babylonians. The Babylonians are the ones who say to one another, "Hey, let's build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make us a name." In the Hebrews' mind, I hope you can see they're quite critical of the Babylonians. We can assume that the Babylonians think that they are building a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven in order to celebrate heavens, to celebrate the gods that the temple is devoted to. However, that next line, "let us make us a name," that kind of points to the ways in which the ancient Hebrews are criticizing the ancient Babylonians. It might not necessarily be a tribute to the gods that they're making. The Hebrews are suggesting that the ziggurat is a tribute to themselves. Let us make us a name. Let us be the kinds of people who can build a fantastic structure that can inspire others with its glory, its might, etc. And I think here you can kind of tell that the Hebrews are being critical of the Babylonians. They're trying to reach the heavens not to celebrate the gods, but to perhaps rival the gods. That makes sense. Okay, we'll read more of this part of Genesis at a later date, but I just wanted to let you know that there's contemporaneous perspectives on these ancient forms. They're not all celebratory. They can be quite critical as well. Okay, so let's go back to Gilgamesh. Okay, so like I said to you in the last video, the Epic of Gilgamesh was composed in via this language, this alphabet system, cuneiform. It was written in various languages as well that were present at the time, and you'll see some evidence of that as you read the epic. Even though all of the things we're reading are in English, they're translated from different versions of the epic as they existed in like ancient Akkadian, ancient Sumerian, these sort of things. But just to kind of give you a visual reminder of what the tablets would have looked like, they come from the library of Ashurbanipal. I believe there's 73 different tablets that came from his library, and then different versions of it existed in different locations as well. But as you start to read the Andrew George edition that I've made available to you, you will definitely notice that something is definitely up with how this thing is formed. You probably have never, I had never read, it looks like a novel, like the book that you would get. Yours is going to look like a PDF, but like I'll just show you the image. This kind of like nonsense with all the sort of brackets and the crazy ellipses, the sometimes there's italics that don't quite make sense. It's kind of interesting. This is the editor's best attempt to use English to convey the fact that there's a lack of form in the original. There's what we call lacunae, or lacuna is singular, lacunae is plural. Lacunae means like a hole. There are literal holes in the tablets. they have been, they were buried for, gazillion years, right? Like thousands of years. So they crumbled a bit. So a lacuna is an unfilled space or interval. It's a gap, a missing portion. In anatomy, a lacuna is a depression in your bone. And so just like you might have like a hole in your bones or like a cavity in your tooth or something like that, there are literal cavities in this ancient text. And so in some cases, the ellipses indicate that we don't really know what word was there. So he who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who, this is a presumption on the part of the editor. He doesn't really know what word was that, but what word was there in the hole, the lacunae, but he presumes it was who, because it's very repetitive structure. And sometimes they don't quite know what was there and they can't really make a good guess, so they'll use ellipses. So he who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew, was wise in all matters. He knew something, was wise in all matters. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew something, was wise in all matters. And so as you keep reading, as you read the text, just kind of skip over those, try your best to kind of make sense of it. You can kind of get the idea of what they're conveying, even with these holes in the original. It's better to indicate that there is missing information than to, lie to you and presume that everything is whole when it is not. So just to remind you, these are what the tablets looked like. Each chapter of Gilgamesh corresponds to a literal tablet that has broken pieces or holes, or sometimes it's like little worms got in there and chewed it. So we just don't know. So now I'm going to be transitioning into the actual story that you have read or are reading. So here, my slide, I wrote Gilgamesh the myth. What's really interesting is the fact that the epic itself wasn't translated into languages that made it survive. Like, it was translated into other languages, but all those versions were buried, were lost for, centuries. It's very interesting that Gilgamesh, when you first meet him as a character, he's kind of larger than life. But the fact is that the sort of myth around him sort of disappeared. It's kind of interesting. And here, let's think about this myth a little bit. So Gilgamesh, these are the first lines of the poem that indicate how important Gilgamesh is to this sort of ancient system of Babylon as a cultural figure. So he's the man who saw the deep, the country's foundation, who knew, was wise in all matters. This is a guy who is all-knowing, wise in all matters. He saw the foundation of the country, so it seems like he's like the first man in some ways. Goes on, he did something everywhere and learnt of everything the sum of wisdom. He saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden. He brought back a tale of before the deluge. So this is sort of cryptic right now. You probably don't know what the heck this is talking about, but you will learn what these lines are referring to. The deluge in particular, this is the word for flood. But here we can kind of deduce that Gilgamesh is, all-knowing. He knew the sum of all wisdom beyond, what's possible to know. He saw what was secret. What is secret? He discovered what was hidden. What was hidden? So it's like these sort of clues given to us, foreshadowing the sort of knowledge that we'll come to have of Gilgamesh. And then the fact that he's going to bring back some tale that existed before the deluge, before the flood that wiped out all civilization. So he comes from before then and brings back the tale of that time. He came a far road, was weary, found peace, and set all his labors on a tablet of stone. He built the rampart of Uruk, the sheepfold of holy Eanna, the sacred storehouse. So this should remind you of a couple slides ago. Holy Eanna, that's the temple of Uruk, devoted to the god Anu. So Gilgamesh apparently is the guy who built that. So he built the ziggurats. He built the rampart of Uruk, the sheepfold. The rampart is sort of the walls of the city. Uruk is the city. They seem to refer to it often as the sheepfold. So a sheepfold is like a cage around which you house your sheep. So much like the walls of a city would protect the people. Gilgamesh is building this protection for his people. He will do a lot of travels, and this is interesting. He set his labors on a tablet of stone. We get the idea from the first lines of the poem that Gilgamesh, he's not only this amazing man who, he's in some ways the first man of this civilization, he's the king and the protector of this city, he's also a writer. This is like one of those stories where the main character becomes the writer of his own story. That's kind of interesting. Okay, let's keep going. Let's turn from the myth of Gilgamesh, this amazing legend, to his physical descriptors as a man, because that's going to be part of his journey through the epic. This sort of difference between his amazing, exceptional, kind of almost godlike status and his very mortal and troubling aspects. Okay, so here again is this image that might be Gilgamesh. He's described in the poem as 2/3 God, 1/3 human. It's kind of funny. They didn't really understand meiosis back then, I guess. Can't really have thirds of a father and mother, but whatever. Anyway, so the thing to note here is more than half of him is divine, and less than half is a human. This is going to be interesting. As you read about Gilgamesh, ask yourself, is he acting like a god in this situation, or is he acting like a man? What is he? Which part of him will rule out, will kind of win the day? He is enormous. That's why people think that this image is Gilgamesh. So he's a triple cubit was his foot, half a rod his leg, 6 cubit was his stride. I think a cubit is like it's like 1.5 meters or something like this. It's huge. Like this man is like a giant. This is why they think, this is a lion. So this giant man grabbing a lion as if it's a little kitty cat. When he grew tall, his beauty was consummate. By earthly standards, he was most handsome. So I think you can agree this man is super gorgeous. He's got a really amazing beard. He's the most handsome man in the world, apparently. He's very tall. His beauty is consummate, so it's like the height of beauty. Anyway, so pretty standard. A lot of protagonists are very attractive, and Gilgamesh is the same. Okay, so what's the problem with him then? He's amazing, he's super tall, he's, mostly divine. Okay, well, why tell a story about him? He sounds kind of boring. Well, we start to learn why. What's the problem of Gilgamesh? Well, before we really learn the problem of Gilgamesh, we start to, hear about the solution to Gilgamesh, and that is Enkidu, this other character that gets introduced. Here, this is sort of an assumption of the sort of representation of Enkidu. This is a wild man figure. You can tell his beard is a little bit more wild than Gilgamesh's. It's, less contained. He seems to be naked, or I don't know, maybe sort of even animal here. I'm not sure if that's a tail. Anyway, interesting things going on here with Enkidu. Okay, so here's where we learn about the problem of Gilgamesh. Oh, so we're quoting some people here. I think these are the common folks. Okay, let them summon Ururu, the Great One. She it was created them, mankind so numerous. Let her create the equal of Gilgamesh, one mighty in strength, and let him vie with him, so Uruk may be rested. Okay, so there's some people asking to summon Ururu, who is this great goddess who created mankind. So she created mankind. They're asking Ururu to create another human who will be the equal of Gilgamesh, one mighty in strength, and let him vie with him so Uruk may be rested. This is quite kind of curious. Why would we need an equal to Gilgamesh? We just talked all about how he's exceptional. He's taller and more handsome than everyone. Why do we need an equal? We need someone to vie with Gilgamesh. Vie meaning be a rival to, someone who can be equal to Gilgamesh. We need literally the equal of Gilgamesh, one mighty in strength, so Uruk may be rested. Here it's implying that something is going on in Uruk that has to do with Gilgamesh's power being unequaled, such that we need someone to be created to be a rival to Gilgamesh so that Uruk can be in peace again. So that implies Gilgamesh is not, he's not promoting the peace of his own city, and he's the king. He should be the shepherd of his sheepfold, but he's not. So then the goddess Aruru, she washed her hands, she took a pinch of clay, threw it down in the wild. In the wild she created Enkidu, the hero, offspring of silence knit strong by Ninurta. So she creates this human in the wild, and here we get a description of Enkidu. All his body is matted with hair. He bears long tresses like those of a woman. The hair of his head grows thickly as barley. He knows not a people, nor even a country. So I might pause here a little bit. How is this guy an equal to Gilgamesh? Gilgamesh was most handsome. He was the king of Uruk. Enkidu knows not a people nor even a country. He's hardly the king. He's completely alone. He doesn't know anyone. He's also not most handsome. He's covered with fur, or hair, that is. And there's pretty interesting clues here. Why do we think it is necessary that Enkidu has long tresses like those of a woman? His hair grows thickly as barley. Barley is a grain. What is going on with this guy and his hair? I'm going to think about that. I might have a question for you to kind of ponder this. In what ways is Enkidu an equal to Gilgamesh when he is so different? Just so you know, Enkidu is kind of our first world example, the first example in the world, that is, of what people will call later a wild man. So this sort of human figure who kind of is completely uncivilized, someone who's almost an animal. Okay, so Enkidu. Why does he solve this problem of Gilgamesh? So he poses a problem. He's meant to solve this problem by promoting someone who can vie with Gilgamesh, but he also poses a problem in and of himself. He's not ready to meet Gilgamesh when we first meet Enkidu. Okay. We meet a hunter. Over the hills, Enkidu roams all day. Always with the herd, he grazes on grasses. Always his tracks are found by the waterhole. I am afraid, and I dare not approach him. Enkidu is scary. He's freaking out the hunter, making the hunter afraid. What is he doing that's so scary? Well, he's roaming all day with the herd. He's eating grass. He's hanging out with the herd by the waterhole. This doesn't sound especially scary to me, but this is potentially interesting. You know, humans don't tend to eat grass. They don't tend to hang out with herds of like antelope or deer. The hunter continues. He fills in the pits that I myself dig. He pulls up the snares that I lay. He sets free from my grasp all the beasts of the field. He stops me doing the work of the wild. Here's the problem. It's not so much that Enkidu is just hanging out with wild animals. He's undoing the work of the hunter. He's filling in the pits that he digs. He pulls up snares that he lays. He's freeing the animals. The hunter's job is to hunt animals. Enkidu is preventing him from doing that. He's freeing the beasts. Enkidu has loyalties to the wrong people, the wrong beings. He's got loyalties to the animals, not to humans. This is Enkidu's problem. So we get to meet a new character who's going to help solve the problem of Enkidu. So this is kind of interesting how the narrative is structured. Gilgamesh poses some sort of problem. We get a new character, Enkidu, who's supposed to solve that problem. Now Enkidu has a problem, and we enter a new character, Shamhat. So what is her purpose in the epic? She's going to solve the problem of Enkidu. So Gilgamesh has this idea with the hunter. Said Gilgamesh to him, the hunter, "Go, hunter, take with you Shamhat the harlot. When the herd comes down to the waterhole, she should strip off her raiment to reveal her charms. He will see her and will approach her. His herd will spurn him, though he grew up amongst it." So here's the plan. Hunter, take with you Shamhat the harlot. Harlot is a tough word. It means, in English, harlot usually means like it's very negative. It's like you are a woman who has sex for money, and it's meant to be shameful. It's a word that's meant to induce shame. But we'll see in a few slides that actually Shamhat is a very respectable character. She does have sexual relationships with people. That's her job, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a horrible thing. Anyway, so sorry for the word harlot there, but so here's the plan. When Enkidu sees Shamhat, when she reveals her charm, she takes her clothes off, Enkidu is going to pay attention to Shamhat, and his newfound attention to Shamhat will cause the herd to spurn him, even though they're his family. He grew up amongst the herd, but his interest in this woman, this human woman's sexuality, will cause him to be spurned by his own herd. And then this plan works. When her, so I've skipped a lot here. There's actually a lot of descriptions of the sexual relationship between Shamhat and Enkidu, so you can read that at your leisure. When with her, Shamhat's delight, Enkidu was fully sated. So after Enkidu and Shamhat have a great time, he's completely satisfied, he's sated with Shamhat's delights. He turned his gaze to his herd. The gazelles saw Enkidu, they started to run, the beasts of the field shied away from his presence. So this plan works. Enkidu's interest in Shamhat sexually caused the herd to spurn him, they run away from him. What is it about sex with Shamhat that causes the herd to run away from Enkidu? Like, what is it? What was it about him before he has sex that made him family with the herd? And what is it after he has sex that changes him? I might ask you that question too. Let's talk about this sort of let's talk about Shamhat in more particular. I said a little bit here about this word harlot and how it's kind of anachronistic to call her that in this way. Her job is not shameful. In ancient Babylon, actually Shamhat's job was very important. Shamhat is linked to Ishtar, the goddess of love in ancient Babylon, and it's what anthropologists and historians call an example of sacred sex rituals that ancient Mesopotamia participated in. So this is going to sound kind of strange, but it was very normal in ancient Babylon. At the top of every ziggurat would be housed a temple priestess like Shamhat, who would be available to have sex with as part of your religious experience of going to the temple. You might pause there and ask why? Like, why is this a thing? What is it about sexuality that might have a connection to religion? This is going to be a reflection question for you too. What is it about? Like, what is it about sex that seems aligned with religious practice? So Ishtar, the goddess of love, people, the temple priestess would kind of partake of this sort of like semi-divine status, much like Ishtar. Here, this image here, this is a blown-up version from this pot, but this is the goddess Ishtar dressed like a temple priestess. Temple priestesses, you could be an aristocratic daughter. You would serve as a temple priestess for a while until they would marry you off. There's contemporaneous reports from ancient Greece about the Babylonian practice of having temple priestesses have sex as part of your religious experience, and they're very, very critical of this practice. And I think from our modern perspective, it is quite interesting, I guess, and you might have qualms about it yourself. But I would urge you to think about the ways in which a lot of rituals that have to do with religion also have a sexual component. Even, from like a Western perspective, the marriage rite. Its history is so bound up with the consummation of the marriage on the same night as the legal connection between husband and wife or whatever. So there are a lot of rituals that various cultures have that link a sort of religious understanding of a connection with God to a very physical connection between people through sex. So this is kind of another one of those examples in ancient Babylon. And so if we think about what's going on with Shamhat and Enkidu, it's not just that they have sex together and it's, you know, fun in the way that like sex should be fun between people. But what Gilgamesh is giving to Enkidu here is a way of, it's almost like a religious gift in a sense. You know, perhaps that's one of the things that differentiates Enkidu from his herd now. He's part of the culture that participates in this religious practice of sex, i.e., that is, he's human. He's not only human, but civilized human. A civilized human like a Babylonian who would have sex as a part of sort of a religious practice, potentially. Okay, so, taking a pause here. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, sexuality can be civilizing and even sacred. Part of the things that differentiates Enkidu from the animals is the fact that he has an interest in human sexuality. He becomes civilized through his having sex with Shamhat. However, we also see in the epic sexuality function in a very different way. And that's what I want to end with in this video with. You know, the sex that Shamhat and Enkidu have seems to be very beneficial, very generative, very good. It helps Enkidu realize that he is human. She later gives him like a makeover, so he becomes a little bit more like Gilgamesh, you know, handsome and put together and these sort of things. But sex in the epic also functions as an avenue through which tyranny can perpetuate. So here's some lines that speak to that. Though powerful, preeminent, expert, and mighty, Gilgamesh lets no girl go free to her bridegroom. The warrior's daughter, the young man's bride, to their complaint the goddess paid heed. So, what is going on with Gilgamesh here? He's powerful, he's preeminent, he's expert and mighty. Although he's all these good things, he does this. He lets no girl go free to her bridegroom. And the warrior's daughter, the young man's bride, are complaining to the goddess about this behavior of Gilgamesh, the fact that he's not letting a girl go free to her bridegroom. Yet, and this is a problem, he is the shepherd of Uruk the sheepfold. He should be protecting the sheep of Uruk. That is, he's the king, he should be protecting his people. And yet, Gilgamesh, the guide of the teeming people, though he is their shepherd and their protector, powerful, preeminent, expert, and mighty, Gilgamesh lets no girl go free to her bridegroom. So what is it that Gilgamesh is doing? He's not letting a girl go free to her bridegroom. What is that? It's kind of like a little bit cryptic. It's kind of like an oblique thing, what they're saying here. Just to spell it out for you, he's not allowing brides to have sex with their husbands on their wedding night. He is forcing all new brides to sleep with him before they sleep with their husbands. And this is a problem, as you can probably imagine. You know, when people want to get married, they want to have sex with the person they're getting married to, ideally, usually. But Gilgamesh is forcing, potentially raping these women. In fact, the warriors are upset, the young men are upset, and everyone is complaining to Anu to get Gilgamesh to stop acting in this way. So, I find this interesting. Sex can function in this epic as something that's generative and amazing and civilizing, but sex can be the means through which something very uncivilized is happening. This king acting as though he is, in some ways, a god, as though he has the right to sleep with whoever he wants just because he is the king. So that's the problem, the initial problem of Gilgamesh. And so to kind of like end today's discussion, I have a reflection question for you. You'll have an opportunity to kind of like take some notes about this and submit them. But if you had the perfect ruler in mind, it doesn't have to be male, female, whatever, the perfect ruler, like someone who's a really great leader politically, what are some of the characteristics of that person? What makes a good ruler? So I'll ask you to think about that and reflect on it. Like, what do they have to have? if you had the best one. And then I'll ask you, is Gilgamesh a good ruler? Like, what are those characteristics does Gilgamesh have? He's got a lot of good things going for him, but what are the things that he's kind of missing, at least at the beginning of the epic, and what might need to change? Okay, so that's basically the end of part 1 for the Epic of Gilgamesh. We'll be talking about assignment 1 in class together, but it's an opportunity to do a little bit more in-depth research on aspects of the Epic of Gilgamesh for you to reflect on about how those topics influence the meaning of the epic. There's 5 different topics that I have organized, and you can pick which one you feel more affinity towards, but everyone will have their own individual topic within each of these 5. So there's not going to be a lot of overlap, so don't worry. Everyone will have something pretty unique to contribute. But start thinking about what you might be interested in terms of the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's a lot of animals that are referenced. Bulls, herds, snakes, birds, these sorts of things. Are you interested in the language and the translation of the epic? This is kind of more of a historical committee. It's pretty interesting. Are you interested in the role of women in the epic, like Shamhat, and we meet Gilgamesh's mother, other women as well. Dreams are really important to the epic. Are you interested in thinking about how dreams get interpreted in this ancient text? And then rituals and their uses. There are various rituals. There's a funeral. There's you can think of what Gilgamesh is doing with the women in his kingdom as a sort of ritual, and so there's an opportunity to research that as well. So think about what you're interested in, and you'll have an opportunity to select a topic within one of these 5 categories when we meet. So looking forward to it.